as a film that was translated to game. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into specifics.
If I start crying, it's your fault.
But basically, you know, there's the plot of the films, but the plot of the game is somewhat different. So there is scope for some creativity. You are working to sort of, you know, certain constraints to kind of, you know, sort of recreate the movie world within the game, for example. But anything like that, if you know, there's usually sort of some kind of buy-in from people and sort of enjoyment of what they're doing, and there's the technical achievements and sort of your pride in your own work that certainly when I've worked on licenses I've had.
I think there's a couple of things you sort of, I mean, in answer to your question specifically, yes, like there are things that you work on that grind into the ground that you really wish you could just walk away from, and I've worked on some good licenses and some not so good licenses. I mean, we've sort of done a couple of you know, things like SpongeBob SquarePants and cars and things like that. I had to design a GBA game based on the film The Polar Express at one time, which we weren't allowed to have. For those of you who haven't seen the film, and I'm hoping that's a fair few of you,
Is it not a very good film, David? Is that the subtext?
I'm no film. I'm no film critic. I could dig myself a hole here. But
Tom Hanks can kick your ass.
Almost certainly.
Tom Hanks made that film, okay?
And the film's about a boy who's completely unremarkable other than the events of the film that occur to him, which is sort of like a roller coaster. So the character in the game, it's a platform game that is 2/3 set on a train, which does somewhat limit your options. And you're not going to do anything dangerous. The character can't do anything that a normal little boy couldn't do. There are no bad characters in the game. There are no sort of these kind of this is about the most restrictive license I can imagine. I remember sitting. They're absolutely ridiculous. So they bring you a script, but it's sort of it's almost handcuffed to somebody's briefcase, you know. And they let you have it for like an hour to read the script, and it's got to be given back and sealed and all this sort of thing. And just there's absolutely nothing in here that would translate to the sort of thing that the requirements of this game have to be. And so you work on these things. But what you have to do is, as a developer, there's a difference between art and craft. Yeah. So a lot of the time you're working on projects that aren't necessarily what you would regard as your art. Like there are things that that maybe you take as an opportunity to develop yourself professionally, things that you take pride in the craft of your skill in building this thing. And there is a certain grim pleasure you can take in moulding one of these awful licenses into something that is halfway decent. At least you try and get halfway there, and you use that as an opportunity to build a tool set that you can use later to work on something, sort of almost like a free R&D period or something that later on that you can leverage. So you look at building tools for making levels, tools for making characters, and you get a pipeline going for character animation, things then that you sort of, as you're working on these things, you're working towards this specific short-term goal that if you focus on is perhaps not that satisfying, but you find ways to benefit from the building of these things and to teach yourself how to do these things better, so that when the time does come, when you get a chance to make something that you feel is of more merit, is of more art, then you've got the craft, you've got the tools, you've got the skills to be able to build that into something that you can genuinely... You hit the ground running with that stuff as a result. So I think really when... maybe it's a little bit of a trick you play on yourself, but when you're working on things that you are... You might rather be working on something a bit more exciting. It's also worth remembering as well that most people in most other jobs aren't working on great works of art that they truly do. I mean, most type of work that human beings do to put food on the table is not... I mean, there's not necessarily a requirement that everything you do is dazzlingly, earth-shatteringly brilliant. So even working on a fairly limiting, stodgy license is still, you're still working in an environment where you're creating something that's going to be fun for someone. So you find ways to glean benefit, to level yourself up a bit whilst you're doing that in preparation for the main event around the block.
I don't want to talk licenses, but there's also some fairly stodgy original IP around as well. So.
Oh yeah.
Would you name names? Come on.
I'm not naming names.
Does anyone want to name names? No.
I can. Oh, no, it's a license. Sorry, no. It was. Yeah, what's that?
No, just say it anyway.
That was Beast Wars on the PlayStation. Did you ever see it? Walk past it very fast. But I mean, actually, I'd agree entirely with what David said. I've worked for 5 years on Monopoly games on various platforms. And you do get quite soon to that point when you just don't want to play Monopoly anymore. But for instance, when we took it to PlayStation, there was still a certain amount of enjoyment when we finally got an auction system to work on that little power screen with no pixels, with 4 players, all on simultaneously, with all the cards and all the little things you had to be able to move around, and it felt reasonably elegant and you could play it. And that was like, pretty much a high point for that development. So there's always little things, little victories that you can set yourself and define that will make any game worth doing.
We'll come back to you.
So you guys were obviously quite good at keeping sort of motivated in keeping it safe. Do you find, especially in Tantalus, that you can keep that across the board for the whole company, including programmers and QA?
I don't know if Andrei's going to try and spin this, but no, I think you can. I mean, each person has their own reason for doing what they're doing. And the kind of tricks you can play on yourself, it's somewhat unethical to try and play them on other people. Yes, I mean, from my own point of view, I mean, I'm not a producer. I think maybe Andrei has to work a little harder at this than I do. But certainly my design team, I try and find ways to show them like what we're doing here. I mean, in the short term, our expectations have been notched down a little bit from where we ideally like to set them, perhaps because of some external constraint of the nature of a license or whatever. But we're looking at this as a step on the way to something else, and this is and basically to answer your question, I try and let that rub off as best I can. But people do become disillusioned, and they leave and they go and do something else, and sometimes that's better, and sometimes that's worse. Sometimes you need a bit of time away to recharge. I've personally had some tough times and become disillusioned. One major time I ran off overseas and hid from the world for a few months, and but came back and had a slightly different mindset, and I think have been better for it. But as with anything creative, even if you're working on something that feels a bit soulless and a bit constrained, a bit difficult, you're having to put yourself into it, and that's not an infinite resource. I mean, you do sometimes get a bit run down. I can't blame people on the team for sometimes becoming disgruntled or upset. I mean, you try and buoy them up as best you can, but at the end of the day, I don't think any company can keep everyone in that mindset of focusing on the positive all the time. It's definitely worth trying, but
I guess that's what wages are for.
We won't talk about wages. I think actually it's got worse with the bigger teams. When it was small teams, it's pretty easy to G people up. You know them better. It's actually quite easy to have a meeting, for instance, where say there's 10 or 15 people in a room, 2 guys are really not into it, and they can actually bring the whole room down quite quickly. And it's just not, as David said, there's not a lot you can do about it. You can then try and have individual conversations. But there are times, there's dark days in every project when you just think it's just not ever going to end.
I was looking at the NeoGAF message boards this morning before I came in, and there was a thread someone had started saying, why do people leave the games industry? And yet you come to a games industry conference and there are sessions on how do people stay in the games industry. It seems like there's this perception that, you're working on games, so you're immediately going to turn up and you're going to be saying, make the rocket launcher shoot out the monkeys carrying chainsaws, and it's going to be like non-stop awesome, which, I mean, you do have, there is a lot of awesome in the games industry for sure, but there's also a lot of stuff that isn't on the surface of it that much fun. And, it's an interesting perspective that, that maybe some outsiders are sort of, when I started at Ratbag, there were people there who were already, and they've been doing brutal overtime, sick to death of it, and I walked in and it's like, this is a dream factory. This is, this is incredible. And there's these guys I'm having coffee with who are just, they want to throw themselves under a train because they've had their relationships break up on them because they're working so much overtime. They're really upset. How can you be so? Don't you see what you've got here? And then sure enough, you go through a bit of some tough times, and you yourself are thinking, this isn't worth it. You can't push through it. But I think there are problems, particularly in the teething stages of some companies, that you go through a tough time, and you figure out those problems, and then you're able to kind of progress and do good work.
Hi, we do.
Would you be able to share with us some of your most satisfying moments you've had after the initial honeymoon period of being in the industry?
Oh, I know. Yeah, no, I'm okay. I was at Revolver and I went up to the bar and I looked over at the person next to me and they had tattoos on their arm of some of the game characters of a game that I'd worked on. And I was like, oh my god, you're so cool. I said that and sort of explained, why I sort of picked up on it and went, oh my god, you are so cool. And we just kind of like bounced off each other. And you don't realise at the time when you're kind of plodding away in an office and sort of like, churning stuff out. But you do sort of like, impact more people than you think you do. and it's really bizarre and absolutely wonderful.